Good evening, folks, and thank you for that nice welcome. Thank you for the introduction, Father Paul. I'm genuinely thrilled to be here, helping celebrate the 224th anniversary of the Polish Constitution of May 3rd, 1791. This is also the 125th anniversary of the celebration of Polish Constitution Day in Winona, Minnesota. For whatever reason, the people of Winona, Minnesota couldn't wait an extra year to celebrate the bicentennial of the Polish Constitution. They had to celebrate the 199th anniversary first. We Polish are pretty strange people. It was a pretty big deal when the Polish Constitution Day was celebrated on May 4th, 1890. There was a mass offered at St. Stanislaus Church, which was just a little bitty wooden frame place that desperately needed to be replaced. There was a mass, there was a parade, there was a banquet, and then there was a speech by none other than Hieronym Derdowski. Hieronym Derdowski was the first person to publish poetry in the Kashubian language. He was also the editor of Winona's Polish language newspaper, Wiarus, which you can read on a little plug here, read on microfilm here at the Polish Museum. We fast forward to 2015. We have had a wonderful Polish-American Mass that was offered at St. Stanislaus Kostka by Father Hargesheimer and Father Breza. We have had wonderful music. We have had Rodney Uprecht playing on the piano for us before mid-meal, and we have had Molly Matulinsky playing on the violin for us after the meal, and I would ask you to give them both a really big hand. We have been treated to a really wonderful dinner. We have had some really good Polish beer. And now you are going to hear a speech about Polish Constitution Day from somebody with the last name Hughes. It doesn't sound quite right, does it? And I don't blame you. As my Hughes cousins, Nancy Hammer and Lisa Olsen McDonald will tell you, I'm very proud of my Welsh, Scotch, Canadian Hughes heritage. But I'm really here tonight as the son of Laura May Baminick Hughes, who was born across the street from St. Stan's Church to two Polish parents, Jan Karol Bembenek and Leokadia Weronika Polowska. And that makes me 50% Polish. And I have been to Kashubia 6 times in the last 4 years, so maybe that pushes me over the border a little bit. I'm as Polish as I can be, and I hope that I do a good job of giving you some insight into Polish Constitution Day, what it means for the Polish, what it means for the Kashubian Polish community of Winona. The first quote-unquote Kashubian Polish people arrived in Winona in the late 1850s. They didn't really identify as Polish, they didn't identify as Kashubian, although they spoke the Kashubian language. They didn't really identify themselves as anything except for glad to be out of Prussia, glad to be here in Winona, a new land of new opportunities. Their first settlement in Winona in the late 1850s was about 2 blocks east of here, at the corner of Laird Street, that's 2 streets down, and Front Street. The locals from Winona, the Yankees, the English speakers, called this place Warsaw, even though the average Kashubian couldn't find Warsaw on a map and couldn't even care less. They were basically here to be accepted and work and make a better life than they could make for themselves back in the old country. Roughly 80% of Winona's first quote-unquote Polish immigrants were actually from Kashubia. Kashubia is all around you on the walls. I won't give you a lecture on that. But if you account for intermarriage between Polish families, basically, if you're from Winona and you have Polish ancestors, you are really a Kashubian Pole. 30 years later, the year is 1890, the Polish community is about to celebrate Polish Constitution Day for the first time. Already, in their hearts of hearts, the Kashubian Poles of Winona, they're all Polish, 100% Polish. They've been called Polish, they embrace being Polish. Within their first 30 years of being here in Winona, the Polish community achieved some really amazing things. First, St. Stanislaus Church. It began in 1873, really. It had outgrown its original frame building. The building we know now as the Basilica of St. Stanislaus Kostka was just a dream in people's head, but you know how wonderfully that dream came to reality. We had Polish Americans being elected as county commissioners, Polish Americans being elected as school board members, and as early as 1875, a native-born Polish immigrant, Marcin Trevitsky, was elected to the Minnesota State Assembly in St. Paul. One of us, up in the government in St. Paul, 1875. Winona was one of the most important cities in what has been called Polonia. Polonia is a word meaning the Polish immigrant community inside the United States. Other important cities of Polonia that you may have heard of include Chicago, Buffalo, New York, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Winona. Winona was an important Polish-American city already by 1890. By all accounts, Winona's Polish community had already arrived and placed itself on the scene by 1890. No wonder they jumped the gun by a year celebrating the bicentennial of the Polish Constitution Day. They had already arrived. This was something to celebrate. The Constitution of May 3rd, 1791 really was an awesome achievement. If you attended the Mass and brought home one of the programs, you will read a really excellent article by Dan Shima, who lives in the Twin Cities, and wrote a beautiful, easy to read, and very clear explanation of just how important the Polish Constitution was. I'm not going to repeat that. Rather, I'm going to stress that in 1791, Poland was in a tight spot. They were surrounded by the Russians, by Prussia, and Austria-Hungary. Already in 1770, this is the history part, there's not going to be a test on this. The Russians, the Prussians, and the Austrians helped themselves to chunks of Poland, and there was nothing Poland could do. One thing the Polish government realized it could do is get its own political house in order. And so they wrote the Polish Constitution of May 3rd, 1791. It was the second of its kind in the entire world. We Americans wrote the first one, but ours was a much easier job. We'd already beaten the British. We drove them up to Canada, we drove them back to England. They weren't going to be back for another 25 years. Poland was surrounded by enemies, and they couldn't just carbon copy the US Constitution. They had to write something that would address specifically Polish problems, which I will address in a second. I want you to know that the Polish were not always victims. We weren't always being picked on. From about the late 1300s to the middle 1700s, the Polish and their Lithuanian neighbors, we had at least one Lithuanian in the house tonight, formed a joint republic, a joint kingdom that was basically the superpower of Central Europe. Fought anybody who wanted to fight, took their land away from them, ruled their land, and didn't really care what people thought of it. Well, that won the Polish a lot of bad karma. They also had some strange political beliefs. They had, if you believe this, elected kings. They elected their kings. Some would say that this was a big advance. You can't make somebody a king just because his dad used to be the king. But so often, democracy is better in theory than it is in practice. The Polish nobles elected the king from all sorts. They had Italian contenders and German contenders and Swedish and Russian and Hungarian contenders and occasionally a Polish contender too. They voted for people they thought they could control, not the best possible king. Sometimes they got a good king, more often than not they didn't. And they had another ridiculous custom called the free veto. Basically, any member of the Polish assembly, at any time, if he was displeased with how things were going, he could jump up and yell, veto, which is Polish for I forbid, and everything came to a halt. You think our own government works pretty strangely, and it does. Just imagine if anybody, for any reason they wanted, could jump up and yell, I forbid, and the Senate closes down, the House closes down, the budget closes down. It's a wonder Poland stayed afloat as long as it did. When the Constitution of May 3rd was adopted, it was a very impressive piece of work. It made Poland a constitutional monarchy. All free males over the age of 18 could vote. The women couldn't, but let's face it, this is 1791. It's pretty advanced. The European philosophers thought it was a great constitution. Americans thought it was a great constitution. The one person who had a problem was Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia. She didn't like this constitution at all. She thought it insulted her personally, and she was really mad at King Stanislaus II for doing this, all the more so because he was like her ex-boyfriend. She raised an army, came in, ripped off another chunk of Poland, and sorry to say, that was it for the Polish Constitution of May 3rd, 1791. Poland was further divided for the third and last time in 1795, and it disappeared from the map until after World War I. It was gone from the map from 1795 to 1919. But even so, the Polish Constitution of May 3rd, 1791 lived on in the hearts of patriotic, educated Poles who fought and sometimes died for the chance to make the Constitution come alive again and bring Poland back to its democratic self. It didn't happen until 1919. The average Kashubian Poles who came to Winona in the 1850s didn't really know much about the May 3rd Constitution any more than they knew where Warsaw was. They were too busy trying to survive on the unfertile small farms they were living on. They were too busy trying to steer clear of the Prussians and the Polish. When they came to Winona, they accepted the Polish nationality. They accepted their Polishness. And that meant the entire great tradition of Polish art, Polish music, Polish learning, Polish history, Polish language. They embraced King Jan Sobieski, Kazimierz Pulaski, Tadeusz Kościuszko. They learned how to write correct Polish and speak correct Polish in their Polish school. They had a Polish dramatic club. They had a Polish marching band. They had a Polish newspaper, the Wiarus. They really enjoyed this Polishness. They embraced their Polishness. At the same time, they embraced their Americanness too. They were doing pretty well. In other cities in Polonia, Polish America, you don't find people running for state office, Polish people running for state office, much less winning, as we did here in Winona. We were way ahead of the curve here in Winona in embracing the American lifestyle too. Polish Constitution Day is therefore a real link between the Polish identities of Poles in Winona and their American identities. When the Spanish-American War came 8 years later, an entire company of Poles just volunteered to fight together as the Polish Volunteers. They were Polish and American. They were Polish-American. But I'm sad to say this Polish-American identity came at a cost. Because in this understandable urge to embrace Polishness, they forgot Kashubian. The Kashubian language was not correct. It became considered as bad. It's the language that your old grandfather and old grandmother spoke at home to each other. Whereas good Polish children were supposed to learn what the good sisters were teaching them in the schools and what Father was saying from the pulpit. They would read the newspaper Wiarus and model their Polish on what they read in the paper Wiarus. The editor of the newspaper Wiarus was Hieronym Derdowski. I mentioned him earlier. He was the first published Kashubian poet. He was born in Vienna, as were many Winona Poles. He had a Kashubian heart, but he recognized that Kashubia depended on Poland. You look over here on the wall, you will find one of his very most famous sayings. I'm going to pronounce it badly, but I'll try anyway if my ancestors will help me. Nima Kashub bez Polonii, a bez Kashub nima Puski. There is no Kashubia without Poland. There is no Poland without Kashubia. Derdowski realized he was enough of a Polish patriot to understand that Kashubia is small and agricultural and admittedly backwards in some ways. Where the Polish have this great big glorious country with a high culture, the Kashubians need Poland. He also believed that Poland needed Kashubia in order to be fully Polish, which couldn't be more true. But the upshot of Derdowski's belief was that a Kashubian must also become Polish in the old country. He believed this in the old country. And he believed that it was true in Winona, Minnesota also. He knew that 80%, I got the number from his writings, that 80% of Winona's Poles actually were Kashubian by birth. But in order to survive, they had to become Polish Kashubians in the old country and also in Winona. Derdowski was proud of how he taught the Kashubians of Winona to write proper Polish by reading his newspaper. He died at the early age of 50 in 1902. I wish he would have lived 100 more years to share with us the Polish term for 100 years is stolat, that he had lived another 100 years to share with us more fully his Kashubian heritage. But as it is, basically because of Derdowski's early death, I really do believe that the Poles of Winona lost Kashubia for a while, had no idea that they had this language that was not Polish, these customs that were not Polish. They were happy to be lumped in and associated with and proud to be associated with their Polish comrades, with their American comrades, but they really did lose Kashubia. In Poland today, there is no Kashubia without Poland. Right now, if it's about 7 o'clock here, it's about 2 a.m. in Poland, and I can assure you they are still celebrating Polish Constitution Day full blast. They may not be standing too straight. They may be holding their stomachs. And their legs may be tired from all the dancing. But they still take this holiday very seriously. It's the national holiday of Poland. They also realize, in modern-day Poland, that there is no Poland without Kashubia. The Kashubian language is still taught in schools today. Every year they hold the World Kashubian Meeting, where Kashubians from around the world come to a Kashubian city. We have a parade, we have a banquet, we drink lots and lots of vodka, sniff Kashubian snuff, and I step on the ladies' feet. They call it dancing, but they're very nice. They are working very hard to preserve their Kashubian heritage in Poland to this very day. Winona's sister city of Bitów bills itself as Miasto na Kaszubach, a city in Kashubia. That's how seriously they take it. When I visited Bitów 2 years ago, I got the spiffy necktie and my own horn full of Kashubian snuff. And every time I feel like sneezing my brains out, I just take a little pinch and take a little sniff and wow, I get Kashubian. The people I meet in Kashubia are very eager for knowledge about you, about Kashubians who live in Winona. When I came to my first Kashubian meeting, annual World Meeting of Kashubians 2 years ago, they asked me. There were a bunch of Kashubians from Ontario, Canada, and they marched in the parade. Where are all the Kashubians from Winona, Minnesota? And I said, you're looking at them. And I'm not even from Winona, Minnesota. It would be my great dream to be one of the people marching in this parade at the World Meeting of Kashubians in July 2016. I would like to announce here that I will be leading a tour of interested people. I've already got 10 or 11 people committed to going on this tour in July of 2016. A 9-day tour in which we would explore the birthplaces of Winona's ancestors, meet real-life Kashubians, dance with them, eat with them, drink with them, and get to know them a lot better and allow them to get to know us a lot better too. Winona has a very proud Polish heritage. We have a Polish museum, thanks to Father Bryza. We have St. Stanislaus Basilica, which still, to my mind, dominates the Winona skyline, such as it is. I would say to you, though, that Winona's Polish achievements are also really Kashubian achievements. And I think that Winona and the world has had Poland without Kashubia for too long. In addition to just being the biggest, concise, compact community of Kashubians in the United States, Winona has also been the center of a sort of Kashubian renaissance over the last generation, let's say. Its center is right here, the Morrison Annex, the museum building proper. And I would like to identify at this point and call your attention to 3 people who have been at the forefront of this Kashubian Renaissance. One of these is the gentleman sitting up front, Father Paul Bryza, the founder and guiding vision of the Polish Cultural Institute and Museum of Winona, since its inception in 1979 or whenever it was that people started bringing him things to save and put in his parents' garage. He didn't start the museum, I'm told, until his parents said, no more putting things in our garage. Another one of these people who can't be here with us tonight, but I spoke with her yesterday, and she sent her regards, is Ann Pawlowski, the celebrated teacher, storyteller, and author of the Latch Valley series, a series of books about young Kashubian American farm girls growing up in Trempealeau County. She can't be here tonight. I got to speak with her, and I'm very proud to say that she is my second cousin. I'm proud to be related to her very deeply. And the third person I want to call out as contributing to this Polish Kashubian Renaissance is Ron Dolewski, who has spent his entire life living here on both sides of the river and has become basically the chronicler of life in Dodge and the surrounding areas. If I'm not really advertising or anything like that. But he has 2 books that are on sale. He doesn't get a penny of royalties from these. He does this as a service. I have owned 1 copy for about 3 years and given away at least 2 copies of his books, Dodge, Wisconsin, and Marshland and Whistler's Pass on route number 35. I'd like to ask that you give these people a nice hand of applause and just an appreciation of what they did for us. And thanks also to our community's efforts in being as awesome as we are. Thanks to Father Paul's efforts and Ann's efforts and Ron's efforts in reclaiming our Kashubian history and bringing it back to us. We can say with great confidence that Winona, Minnesota truly is the Kashubian capital of America. And in conclusion, the happiest words my students have ever heard, and in conclusion, that usually gets a standing ovation from the crowd. Some of you in this room today are Polish by birth, Kashubians by birth. Some of you are Kashubian Polish by marriage, and some of you are Kashubian Polish in spirit. But even everybody here is Kashubian Polish in spirit today, and that's a very good thing. In Poland, they have a custom. It's called 100 lat. The phrase 100 lat in Polish means 100 years. It's a popular greeting, especially at birthday parties. And it doesn't mean, and I checked this with Yola, who is Polish, 110% at last count, that it doesn't mean I want you to live to be 100. It means you live 100 more years, starting right now. And since we're only going to have Father Paul and Ann and Ron for another 100 more years, it's time for us, really, seriously, who are a little bit younger than that, to ask ourselves what we can do to continue their excellent work. This is what they've built for us, the Morrison Annex. This is what they've built for us, the Lash Valley series. This is what they've built for us, Marshland and Whistler's Pass on Route 35. They didn't do this for money. They didn't do this to be famous or to make themselves feel great. They did this out of love, and they did this for us. And we owe it to them not to just let it drop and fall away and be forgotten after they've poured their hearts and souls into this. Somebody has to carry on the Kashubian tradition, the Kashubian Polish tradition. You'll read lots of books about Polish Americans and Polish Americans. Very few, 0, about Kashubian Americans, although I'm working on that. If you would consider, walk up to a senior citizen, somebody you know is old, doesn't say much, doesn't get around much and is Polish, just get them talking. Don't ask specific questions. Just get them going. Pay attention to what they say. Write it down. Tape it. There are all sorts of precious memories trapped still in this city, waiting for somebody to tease them out. Write them down. Explore genealogy. Thanks to Mickey and Charlie Siraki just this week, the entire Polish Museum database, genealogical database, has been converted to a format where anybody can walk into the museum, type in a family name, and find their ancestors, in large part thanks to the years and years of toil and data entry by Louise Kronzinski, who is sitting there at that table looking very beautiful in Kashubian today. I'd like to ask that you offer up a hand for Louise and for Charlie and Mickey for their great work. It's also known that the webmaster of the Polish Museum, he works cheap, he's incredibly good looking, and likes to wear yellow ties, takes genealogical inquiries by mail and handles those too. I mean, I'm kind of crazy about that stuff too, and he is also, as I think I mentioned, leading a trip to Kashubia in June of 2016. There's lots of other ways. Just come down to the museum and see what's new. Talk to other people who have your background, who are Kashubian Poles just like you. Go up to Arcadia, like I did yesterday. Go to their beautiful history museum and get to talk with real-life Silesian Poles. Now granted, they're Southern Polish, we're Northern Polish. Kashubian Poles tend to be red-headed or blonde and blue-eyed. Silesians are dark-haired, dark-eyed. They talk funny. They think we do too. And they're wonderful people when you get to know them, as I have gotten to do. Find out what we have in common with our neighbors up in Arcadia and in Independence. It's an awful lot. Finally, I close by saying that Polish Constitution Day is the national holiday of Poland. It is a holiday we celebrate here, and we're celebrating it right now, and rightly so, for its own merits. The Polish people came up with a written constitution 4 years after the United States did, and it was no carbon copy. The Polish Constitution was a great source of pride and strength, even when it was not in effect in Poland. It was an inspiration to Winona's Polish community. They could not wait to celebrate it in 1890 because it was their way of expressing their pride in being Polish and being American. But my final message to you is that, there is also no Kashubian Polish America without Winona. We are only going to have our leaders, Father Paul and Ann and Ron, for another 100 years. It's time for us to step up our game too and ask not just, what's new at the museum, but ask what you can do for the museum. Ask what you can do for the cause. And last of all, I'd be happy to talk about any of these remarks after the speech. I conclude by saying, long live Poland, long live Kashubia, long live America, and to each and every one of you who has put up with me running my mouth for the last 47 minutes, my heartfelt still lot. Thank you all very much.